This special presentation by Lex Media is sponsored by Wicked Bagel, 171 Mass Ave on the Lexington-Arlington line. Good afternoon. I'm David Ilsley, and I'm here with Mark Andersen. And we have a discussion today about the debt exclusion that's upcoming on this Monday, specifically the vote that's coming up on 3 separate projects. Quickly, a little bit about Mark Andersen. He is a 20-year Lexington resident. He is a member of the Town Meeting Members Association from Precinct 6. He is a chartered financial analyst and got his PhD from Harvard. Mark, thank you very much for coming on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you, David.
And we'll get right into some slides right away. And we're, again, specifically focusing on question number 2. They are 3 questions on the ballot coming up, and you can vote for 1, 2, and 3, all as separate voting items. Is that correct?
Yes. Great.
Why don't you start us off with why, maybe you can just briefly tell us what the 3 issues are and the specific one you are here about today.
Thank you, David. So at the election on Monday, voters will have the option to vote on 3 different issues. The first one will be whether to build a new school at Hastings. A second one will be whether to build a new school at Pelham. And a third will be a new fire station. We formed this ballot committee specifically around the preschool because we think some elements of the project make that project less efficient. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to set up the case so that people can understand what our concerns are with the preschool and why we would recommend voting against it.
And most people, I think, and including me, thought those were all lumped together in the debt exclusion, so it was either a yes or no for the debt exclusion. But these are 3 very separate projects and 3 very separate votes.
Right. That's a common misconception, and a number of voters have come up to me and said, gee, it's too bad that these are all lumped together. And I've been surprised because on town meeting, it was clear that these are separate. Even one town meeting member told me that they thought they were bundled. So I guess sometimes the fact that we've bundled some years in the past means people think it always works that way.
That's true. Great. Well, why don't we look at some slides you have here and figure out why you are of the opinion that the Pelham School project, which is the preschool project, is really not in Lexington's best interest at this point.
Right. So before we get to the details of the preschool, I think it's really important for voters to understand the overall context that Lexington's facing. And the first part of that is to think about the enrollment crisis for the schools. Some of the voters are unaware that we have an enrollment crisis. And unfortunately, during the last 10 years, enrollment has steadily increased in the schools. We have 7,267 students in the schools today, and we had just over 6,000 in the year 2000. With the enrollments climbing steadily, there are consequences for that. So one of the consequences are additional operating costs as we hire teachers and staff to teach those students. Another consequence is capacity. Our school system in the last few years has been out of capacity at the elementary, the middle, and the high school. And the school committees responded to this by building modulars at various schools. Last year we had a debt exclusion around Diamond and Clark, which intended to renovate those buildings and add more space. So as we go into this election in 2017, taxpayers have to be aware, not only is there a proposed project at Hastings, which will add capacity, there is this project at the preschool, but looming, there's going to be many other projects in the future still to address this enrollment crisis.
And certainly if anyone's been to the high school recently and they've seen the modular classrooms, in the next, X number of years, we can't live forever out of modular classrooms. They're going to have to do something with the high school, especially if the trend in students keeps increasing.
That's right. I mean, my youngest is a senior at the high school. It's increasingly crowded. When I go back to school night, I'm just shocked because these corridors that used to exist in this California-style campus now all have modulars. So it's a bit of a labyrinth going around the various modulars. And these modulars typically have a life expectancy of 10 years. Some of them may last 15. So the projects that we've put in place the last few years are going to have to be revisited within our lifetime and replaced. So that is one of the biggest concerns that we have, is that a high school project will be very expensive, and we think it belongs somewhere in the 10-year horizon. So one of the questions is why is our committee named itself this Committee for System-Wide Master Planning Before Building a Preschool? And I know my school committee colleagues are concerned, about this because they've been engaged in a lot of master planning and site planning over the years. So one of the distinctions that we've made is that the existing town forecast doesn't include all the significant capital assets. And one of the things we'll talk about today is understanding where all of the big pieces fit in, where all of the large projects fit into a capital forecast.
Great.
So the town has provided a forecast for taxpayers of what the financial impact of the override will be. We think that this forecast misses a number of key elements, and I want to highlight what those key elements are. The first element is a 7th elementary school. So the Capital Expenditures Committee indicated that with the continued growth in students by 2021, the system would be at approximately the level of overcrowding it has today. However, the existing plan does not include a 7th elementary school. And one of the reasons is we don't know exactly where it's going to be. It's unclear whether we have the land or not, and we don't know when it's going to happen. But from a forecasting perspective, we believe that when you evaluate these projects, you need to look out for that whole horizon, and you need to include that. So our committee took the public information about other projects and made an estimate that it would cost us about $70 million with some MSBA subsidy to build a 7th elementary school, and we project that to occur around the year 2024.
And that's currently not included in the master plan.
So I think what people would say is that the plan indicates that there would be a need for a school.
But they don't have the numbers.
They don't have the numbers, and so the town projection for financial impact doesn't include that element at this time. Similarly, the high school, there's been a lot of discussion. Are we getting a new high school? Is the new high school going to be done in parts? We don't really know the answers. I think that the school committee has put together a statement of interest, and they're trying to investigate what the options are. And I think this is going to be a multi-year process to come to a solution. As a former FP&A professional, though, my concern is that you have to put that large capital piece in the budget somewhere. So we don't know exactly when it's going to occur. None of us do. We don't know the details of what it's going to be, but it's the biggest rock in our capital plan. So one of the things that was in the Capital Expenditures Committee report is that Somerville built the most recent high school at a cost of $257 million for only 1,590 students. And Lexington High School is over 2,000 students. We could end up building for closer to 3,000 students. And with construction inflation that will occur by the time we get around to building the high school, we could be looking at a $400 million project. And people are shocked by this number, of course, because when Newton North built its high school, which was $198 million, it was criticized as being gold-plated, the most expensive high school in history. And so just to imagine, a few years later, Somerville has surpassed it. And Lowell is now proposing a $350 million high school. So we're talking about high schools at the level of which communities that aren't usually our peer communities are making those investments.
So again, people know this is coming down the road, but even a small conservative number really isn't in the plan yet.
I asked on the town meeting floor about why it isn't in the plan, and again, the answer was because we don't know the time, the dates. I think for those of us in the commercial world, we deal with that by putting a placeholder in place. So what we've taken the liberty to do is make our own estimate of the placeholder and put it in place to make our own financial projection. So I do want to be clear that the Capital Expenditures Committee, Appropriations, the school committee, and the selectmen did not make these estimates. We're suggesting that the voters need these estimates in place to understand what's going to happen to their tax bill over the next 10 years.
Exactly.
An additional element is an operating override that's anticipated. So at the budget summit in October, there was a projection of a $4.4 million deficit in FY20 and a $6.3 million deficit in FY 2021. These deficits aren't a huge surprise because with the large enrollment comes more classrooms. With more classrooms, we get more teachers, and education is the largest driver of expenses in Lexington. So again, our understanding is that's not in the current financial projection. We think that because the projection goes out 10 years and this override is only a few years away, it again belongs in the projection. And we took a conservative $4 million estimate, assuming that maybe these deficits can be addressed through a little bit of cutting out the fat and so on. So we feel fairly confident that some sort of override looks like it's looming, unless Lexington were to change its spending policies today. So what does this look like in totality? Well, the official projection is $15,696 for a median home in 2026. And that's a 27% increase. And we're saying that that number is not sufficient. That 27% increase over 10 years does not reflect the full cost of all of the things that Lexington will be doing during that time. So once we add in the high school, a 7th elementary school, an operating override, and an adjustment to the annual increase that we've calculated for real estate taxes, we end up with a total of $17,770 for the median household. And that's a 44% increase over today. So for anybody who's owning a house today, maybe $17,770 isn't their number. They just need to take their number and add 44%. It's almost a full half again, and that's the tax bill they'll be looking at 10 years from now.
And that's if Lexington continues with these projects that we know about today. We just haven't put the numbers to.
Right. And I think, I think some people have puzzled a little bit that we're talking a lot about this total tax level, because when we go to a debt exclusion, what's usually highlighted for the voters are the incremental financial impacts of the debt exclusion. How much more is this fire station going to cost? How much more is Hastings? How much more is the preschool? In the case of funding the preschool, the town is funding the Pelham land out of a capital stabilization fund it already has. So the apparent cost of the preschool to the taxpayer is below the total cost of the preschool. But a taxpayer is being asked to consider these increments, and they seem like small increments, like, gee, what's $70 a year for a preschool, when in fact a taxpayer who's on a fixed income needs to consider the total amount. And one of the arguments that's been made is that the total amount is considerable, and the town needs to come up with more economical ways to fund these projects.
Because what you're saying really is that $70 is going to be next year, but 10 years from now it's going to be way over $70.
Well, there's the 70 for that project, and then the next project, and the next project, and the next project. And one of the concerns we have is by doing some of the small projects first, are we putting at risk the larger projects? As someone whose kids just went through the school, I can tell you that dealing with a high school where we're looking at a $300 million investment from our taxpayers should be one of the first priorities that we need to have. Once we solve for that priority and we understand, is it going to be a new school? Is it going to be a rebuild? Where is it going to be located? Are we going to get MSBA funding? Then we can go and address the smaller pieces. There's sort of an analogy in packing algorithm, which is you don't put the small rocks in your pack first and then ask whether the big rock fits at the end. You put the big rocks in first. And that doesn't mean that you have to build the high school first. It means that you need to solve for the high school first. Then you need to solve for the 7th elementary school second, because that's a large project. It involves a parcel of land. We haven't identified where that parcel is, what type of land swap may need to occur. And then as you get those big building pieces in place, then you can fit in the other pieces around that.
And maybe briefly too, we could touch on, the state does mandate we have a preschool, and we do have one now. Could you just talk briefly about the number of students it serves and whether we think that the current situation really is good enough for the next couple of years, and why maybe we can postpone that?
Yeah, I think those are good questions. I know that on the Yes campaign, there's a fair amount of discussion around the fact that preschool is a mandated service. I think it's important to point that out because some taxpayers think preschool, I didn't get a public preschool. But in fact, it is a mandated service for students with special needs. It's been in existence for a number of years. And my colleagues at the Yes campaign point out that the school has had to be relocated quite frequently. And so it does need a permanent home eventually. My committee's position is that the facilities are not ideal at the preschool. They could be improved considerably, but in the large realm of things, so can many other things about the Lexington schools. So we don't think that these facilities are ideal in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
In terms of the number of students, I was quite surprised about how small the enrollment was at the school. There are 77 students enrolled at the school today, of whom 28 are enrolled with special needs, and they're covered by the mandate. Those 28 students are entitled to a free public education appropriate for what their needs are, but they're also entitled to be mainstreamed. And to be mainstreamed means that those 28 students are accompanied by other students who aren't mandated to receive an education, They are tuition-paying students who come to the school and create a mixed environment of some children with special needs and other children without identified special needs. So that's how we move from 28 children with special needs to this total of 77. So it is a mandated service, but it's Lexington's approach to providing the service to these 28 children. There's been some discussion about the fact that when the preschool can't serve a child, the child may be placed out of district. What we learned at the Cal debate is there are 2 children today that are being placed out of district for hearing issues, and this runs about $54,000 a child. So we understand also that that's not an ideal situation, although again, it's not clear that we should build an entirely new preschool to deal with this $108,000 cost that we're having, as well as the impact, of course, that that's having on those families.
Right.
When we think about the overall cost, one of the common metrics is to look at the cost per student. And one thing that might surprise people is these 77 students are not all full-time students. So about half of them are full-time and half of them are part-time. But we still think one approach is just to take the total cost of the project and divide by the number of students. And when we take the cost of the land at $8 million, the building at 15, we have $23 million altogether. Divided over the 77 students, we're looking at about $300,000 a student.
And comparatively, that's quite a large number compared to what we spend on a student, let's say, in a middle school.
Right. So I think, again, the typical taxpayer has no idea. Is $300,000 a lot or $300,000 a little? So we compare it with Hastings, and this Hastings project is $75,000 per student. And so we use that as a way of benchmarking and giving taxpayers an idea what an ideal or not ideal cost is. There are some other folks who've come back to us and said, you know, it's unfair to think about $300,000 a student because you're building a seat, a seat for that student, and you're building that seat in a building, and the building's going to last a long time. So typically in finance, we think about depreciation, and one way would be to take this $300,000 and divide it over 30 years and think, well, that's about $10,000 per seat. In addition, because this building is going to be a standalone facility, in spring town meeting, it was identified there would be additional operating costs for that building. Having a school nurse on site and a custodian would add $143,000. Now, those seem like perfectly reasonable salaries for a school nurse and a custodian, so I have no criticism of the amount of money that we pay staff. But when you build a facility for 77 students and then you think about this $143,000 additional cost, you might take a ratio there. You might say, well, how much per student is that? And roughly $140,000 by 70 students is $2,000 a student. So the total cost that we're looking at is $12,000 a year, $10,000 to provide the seat, $2,000 to run the facility separately. And we don't know what the other costs are of running the facility separately, such as HVAC.
Yeah, certainly lots of operating costs that are hard to get a hold of right now.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, at some level, I think the old Harrington, which is where the school administration and a couple of these classrooms are, has probably begun to be past its day of service. And it's too bad we're not in a situation, for example, where we're moving the preschool and the school administration, putting them in one contained facility and then knocking down the whole Harrington. Because at least in that case, you could begin to talk about all the energy savings of heating this other building that's mostly unused. So I think there's room to do some evaluation and see what sort of savings metrics there are. But we want to highlight the fact that there's this $12,000 additional cost per student. And when you think that a typical student in Lexington is costing approximately $20,000 to provide an education, an additional $12,000 for a group of students seems like a large number to us.
Especially a fairly small group of students considering the total population of students in Lexington.
Right. So one of the other comments that we've made is that there's no MSBA funding for this program. This has been a subject of some disagreement between our committee and the school committee. The school committee's position is that the MSBA does not provide funding for preschools. We identified that Dedham received $10 million from the MSBA, and the reason they received the funding is because they did a joint preschool and kindergarten. So again, the school committee's position has been, well, we're not doing a joint preschool and kindergarten. That's not what we envisioned for the land, so we won't have MSBA funding.
We can't ask for it.
Right.
And now MSBA is a state agency?
Right. It's the Massachusetts School Building Authority,
Okay.
and this authority is what's providing us $16 million towards Hastings, and a lot of schools in the state use this to supplement their local funding and build the schools. And I think when we think about the overall position of Lexington's finances, we're thinking it's important to ask for MSBA funding and to create projects that are suitable for MSBA funding. There have been a few claims, I think, that we want to just cover about what LCP as a new building will do. One claim is that it will expand the number of slots for children. Currently, 121 slots are occupied, and the new building is envisioned to be 180 slots. But the Capital Expenditures Committee identified in their spring report that there's 157 slots available in the current situation. So there's not a big capacity difference between what exists today and what's being proposed for this new school. Additionally, there's a claim that this additional capacity is needed, but we don't have a forecast to indicate that it's needed now. Even a back-of-the-envelope calculation on the 28 children who have mandated services, when we think about pairing them with other students, we don't come up with anything near the number of slots that they're talking about. And then finally, there's the issue of Pelham Road. Should we build a school on Pelham Road? So our committee's position is that now that the town has purchased Pelham Road is a valuable asset in our system. And it's a valuable asset for a few reasons.
And we said that was about $8 million purchase, you said?
Right. That was an $8 million purchase, and the selectmen were involved in negotiations for that. At the Springtown meeting, there was a plan to keep the Armenian Sister School on that facility and remodel that to be partly for the community center and partly for this preschool. When Fall Town meeting came, though, the plan had changed already, and the plan was to demolish the building, build a small preschool on the site now, and perhaps build a community center, gymnasium, or / cafeteria on the site later. Okay. Our view is that this is a strategic piece of land because it's hard to find a large undeveloped piece of land in Lexington. It also happens to be next to the community center, and I think that's why the town has looked at this as a possible use of the land. Our concern, however, is that building just a single-story building on this land might not be the right thing for the town. We do need to find where the land is for the 7th elementary school before building on Pelham Road, because we don't know where that's going to be funded. It could be that a land swap is necessary, so that maybe some of the Pelham Road land has to be traded off in order to get some land in some other part of town. So we believe that that's an important thing to consider. Another factor is that the old Harrington School will at one point be removed, and we haven't heard addressed what's going to be put at the old Harrington School. So for example, you could imagine a new building dealing with a part of an elementary school. You could imagine a preschool / school administration or other uses of that land. So for us, it feels a bit like they're going and they have this land. They're eager to use it, they're going to build a preschool on it, and then later address the question, what becomes of this other piece of land? There's something similar that's going on with the swing space being created for the fire station. So what we heard on town meeting is that a swing space will exist so that they can rebuild the fire station, and then down the road, that swing space might be used for the police station, and then maybe down the road that could be used as a school administration building, but there's a lot of sort of what ifs and possibilities. We don't really know where that's going to go. So if it becomes clear that that's where the school administration is going to settle, then that begins to lock down one of the assumptions that might exist in the plan. But again, that swing space is a $4 million space, just like the $8 million piece of Pelham land. So for a town that's as tax-strapped as we think Lexington is today, having these extra parcels that we might end up being able to put back in the pot to get money to fund where we need our pieces of land is helpful.
Oh, very important.
Similarly, the school committee has land at Laconia, so that's occasionally thrown out as a possible location for the 7th elementary school, but I would say more than half the time that that's brought up, someone raises that, you can't put the 7th elementary school there. The site's inadequate, it's landlocked, it's, over in a neighborhood with, that doesn't have adequate transportation. So I think from where our committee's sitting, our view is that we really do need to get some clear answers to these things before going ahead and building a school, especially a school that's as small as the preschool will be in the realm of the projects that we have in our future.
Okay, so maybe just to summarize, if you could just give us, a quick, here we are for the voters. We're trying to explain only one part of what's going on Monday. but if you could just summarize your committee's findings and what you're trying to pass along to the voters.
Okay. So we do think that one of the most important things facing Lexington today is a school enrollment crisis. The consequence of the school enrollment crisis is that taxes are going to continue to increase, and we believe they're going to increase more than are projected today. We think it's not a big surprise. With more students are going to come more teachers, and apparently also a 7th elementary school, and we expect a renovation of the high school, and there will probably be replacements of a number of these modulars that have arisen over the last 10 years. With this comes an operating override. So this is a large tax expenditure that we're talking about. As a result of these taxes and the number of people in our community who are on fixed incomes, we think it's important to make sure that every dollar is spent wisely. Our belief is that the preschool is not an efficient project, and that we need to focus really on tax efficiency at this point. And as a consequence, we're asking voters to vote no on Monday for the preschool, and let's go back and figure out how we can put all of these plans in action for the long term for Lexington's economic health.
Great. Well, Mark, thank you very much for coming in this afternoon. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope the voters have learned a lot as well. Again, I hope people do get out and vote on Monday, and I hope this clarifies your position on that matter.
Thank you very much, David.
Appreciate it. That's it for today. Thank you very much for watching.